Tonight, breaking news on the flood emergency. The entire town of Rochester ordered to leave now. Victoria in the grip of its worst flood emergency since the 1970s. Hundreds of homes under threat. A warning, the wild weather could last for a month as Melbourne braces for a peak hour deluge. Bali bombing survivors in tears as graphic footage of the attack plays at the 20-year vigil. Free IVF for thousands of Victorians, the first public clinic to open within days. And the Caulfield Cup cult favourite bearing a cricket great's name.
This is Melbourne's 9 News with Peter Hitchener.
Good evening. Several communities are fighting to keep their heads above water as Victoria's weather emergency unfolds. Our team has fanned out across the state. We'll have live reports from key trouble spots and the latest warnings from Lavinia at the Bureau. But first, Reid Butler joins me from Rochester with breaking news.
Pete, just in the past few minutes, everyone in Rochester has received a text message from emergency services with the urgent advice to evacuate now in capital letters. Waters along the Campaspe River are rising rapidly. Flooding is now expected tonight and as many as 450 homes are at risk. Since that alert was issued, we have seen a steady stream of traffic leaving the town. Most of them are likely heading to Echuca. That's where relief centres have been set up. The advice is if you are heading that way, contact Echuca Police Station and register your details. The town has been bracing for this emergency for days and tonight it is underway. The Campaspe River creeping higher, an entire town in the firing line. Residents in Rochester are about 180 kilometres north of Melbourne with a difficult decision to make. Zelda and her kids have chosen to leave in the caravan.
I think last time they only had 4 hours in the middle of the night to evacuate. That's why the town looks a little bit like a ghost town at the moment.
Down the road, her neighbour Karen is riding it out.
We're going to try and stay as long as we can because we've got too much to lose.
Hundreds of homes could be inundated when the river peaks.
We're expecting to start reaching major flood levels in the early hours of Friday and continuing to rise to levels again that we haven't seen since 2011.
The local aged care home has been evacuated, so has this riverside caravan park.
I've just put all my furniture up onto milk crates and put everything up onto the couch.
Rochester has experienced catastrophic flooding before in 2011. There's a chance this could be worse.
By going over by 10 centimetres is potentially an extra 300 houses will have water across the floor. So that would put the number up to approximately 1,000.
Scary, been through it last time, you know how bad it can get.
But the town is more prepared this time. The SES staging area at the footy ground, a hive of activity all day. Tens of thousands of tonnes of sand and more than 30,000 sandbags assembled by volunteers.
Just doing what we can do to help.
They've got some significant challenges. And the amount of community members that are involved in sandbagging and all of that work, it's truly impressive.
An evacuation shelter has been set up in Echuca, but that town is also being belted by rain, the Murray rising fast. Among those choosing to stay put is Rochester publican Bryce Fisher.
We'll just go upstairs and we'll move all the grog up there and get on it.
Bryce plans to keep his pub open and is offering shelter to anyone who needs to leave their home. In Rochester, Reid Butler, 9 News.
Homes are also under threat at Seymour, where emergency warnings are in place this evening, as Penelope Learsh reports the town is facing its worst flooding disaster since the 1970s.
A creek turned raging torrent at Tullarook, trapping an elderly man inside his home.
Chances are his house could float away. It's not good.
Police working on an exit strategy as his neighbours watch their possessions flow downstream.
They've all just floated by. I've watched them from around here floating by. So I'm just hoping the trailer doesn't float by, you know.
In nearby Seymour, Will Speechley and his mum rushing home to find water rise up their drive.
It's the biggest that we've seen in the area. We had floods in '94, but nothing like this.
I sunk probably 3 foot. And yeah, I had to get myself out of there, but just using a stick to make sure nothing's in the flood water.
Fishing platforms under, bins sinking, parks resembling a lake.
There's the potential for 187 properties to be inundated by floodwaters and a further 279 properties that could be isolated.
Floodwater covering roads in Walmer and Mangalore. Water and trees cutting off the Hume Highway, road closures forcing more than 20 Victorian schools and kinders to send students home. At Heathcote, cars nearly went under. The High Street, its own water system.
Definitely like a river at the moment, there's insane things going through, fence posts, bins, everything's floating through. In
Kyneton, water flows freely through the town, Daylesford under threat from a moving deluge. And cutting off homes at Lancefield. Near Bendigo, the Strathfield Say Oval now a swimming pool. Families evacuating as water approaches their doors. A surging stream, the only traffic getting through this underpass as roads begin to resemble waterfalls. At Swan Hill, the town flooded, emergency services draining water out of backyards.
There's over a foot in the backyard here now, so nearly over the top of my gumboots.
In the centre of Wangaratta, council workers have been busy laying hundreds of sandbags ready to protect a park and nearby kindergarten as the King River rises. Regional Victorians doing all they can to prepare as they anxiously wait for the worst to come.
We could see another 20 to 60 millimetres across those same impacted areas across northern and central Victoria. We could even see some isolated higher falls, particularly along the northern slopes and in the northeast of the state.
Penny residents there are also being told to move to high ground.
Pete, residents from Seymour to Lake Eildon along the Goulburn River are being urged to act now. Low-lying areas are already being impacted by floodwaters. Where we are in this street, we've seen them rise rapidly just in the past hour, and it's growing by the minute. We've got shops and businesses inundated in this area. Also the home of Will Speechley and his mum, that's behind us. The water is heading right for their doorstep. They've made the decision with their neighbours to evacuate. None of them know what they'll be coming home to tomorrow.
Penelope Leash reporting. Thanks, Penny. The weather's expected to wreak havoc in Melbourne too, with heavy rain pounding parts of the city. Several roads have been closed, cars stuck in floodwater, and hundreds of homes are without power. Shubha Krishnan reports.
The rain was relentless, the city soaked and sodden, and on the northern fridge near Gisborne, two men making the regrettable decision to drive through floodwaters, their minivan becoming stuck as the river torrent rose.
Power of nature, never underestimate it.
A lucky escape for 60-year-old Michael Downs. He suffered a stroke just days earlier.
I only got into the current a small bit, but once it got into the current I couldn't back out.
SES using a tow truck to rescue the men, that's despite the early warnings.
Please don't drive into floodwaters. It's very dangerous for you, and it's also very dangerous for the person who has to come and rescue you.
Emergency services responding to more than 1,600 call-outs in the last 24 hours, 30 for floodwater rescues, while more than 300 calls were for downed trees.
If you attempt to drive through flash flood waters, it could be the last decision you make.
Rapid flows along the Yarra, Dietz Falls in Abbotsford putting on a show. Roads blocked and cars diverted on City Road in Southbank as workers furiously tried to fix a pothole, growing larger with each downpour. St Kevin's on the banks of the Yarra forced to close, students told to work from home. The Spirit of Tasmania going nowhere. Up to 4 sailings cancelled after the Port of Devonport was deemed too dangerous to open. Torrential rain expected in the city, Melburnians told to brace themselves for the deluge.
The greatest risk is between 5 p.m. and 7 p.m, when we could see an intense shower line move across the area with some locally heavy falls.
Anglers Tavern sitting along the swollen Maribyrnong, preparing for the worst.
Potentially up to a metre of water through our bistro area, so that's pretty much our main concern.
Closed today and over the weekend too.
Water can seep through the walls and windows and stuff, so trying to protect where we can.
We're reasonably confident that as the water comes through to Maribyrnong Township, that it will remain within the levees.
Now, despite those words of confidence from the SES, the Anglers Tavern is taking no chances. They're expecting parts of their pub to be underwater by midday tomorrow. They were sandbagging today and lifting furniture to higher ground. They sit right on the banks of the Maribyrnong, and they say they probably won't be open for a few days. They're taking all possible precautions for their pub and their patrons. Now, in terms of houses in the area, the SES says only a handful are in danger of flooding, but they've had plenty of time to prepare. Pete?
OK, thank you, Shubha. Now let's go live to Maggie Rayworth, who's in the city. Maggie, the rain is impacting transport services.
There certainly will be some disruptions to transport tonight, Pete. The rain is kicking in and we're just moments away from being in the middle of the worst of this weather event. It's really bucketing down here at Flinders Street now, and for commuters that will make for a tough journey home. If you look around, you can see plenty of umbrellas here, hoodies covering faces, and people even running through to get to their train. Now, for motorists in particular, they're being told to keep an eye out for any road closures tonight. Many roads, major roads, are closed due to flash flooding. Those drivers are being told to keep an eye out for any debris on the road, fallen trees and even flash flooding. Those catching a train home, particularly V-Line, coaches are replacing many trains tonight, and for the trains that are still operating, they will be running at a reduced speed. Now, Melburnians, of course, they've braced for this weather. Many came prepared for the commute. Take a listen.
We've been told to bring all of our wet weather gear and stuff, so we're ready for it.
I've got coat, umbrella. I'm English, so I'm used to rain, so...
You're all set?
I'm all set.
Now, Pete, the advice tonight is if you don't need to travel tonight, stay home, because conditions tonight are dangerous on the roads. And of course, Pete, the advice to never drive through floodwater.
Absolutely. Thank you, Maggie. Maggie Rayworth. And Lavinia joins me now from the Bureau of Meteorology. Lavinia, we've had some record-breaking rain, haven't we?
Oh, we have, Pete. Since this system developed yesterday morning, a number of places across the state have had their wettest October day on record. In total, Strathbogie in the North Central District has been inundated with 186 millimetres. There's been 122 in Seymour. Bendigo has recorded 106. Around Melbourne, the biggest totals have been in the east, 43 millimetres at Heathmont, 40 at Ferny Creek, and the city has recorded 28. To tell us more, I'm joined by senior forecaster Keris Arndt. Hi, Keris.
Hi, Lavinia.
What are you forecasting for Melbourne tonight?
Sure, it's nearly over for Melbourne. We've had a band of rain just go through the city now, dropping a few millimetres, somewhere between 5 and 10 through most suburbs. That's moved through pretty short and sharp, and then we're going to have some kind of lighter, moderate rain continuing through the evening, kind of easing by about 10 or 11, and then we'll have some clear skies to come for the rest of the night.
So it's moving through to the east. What can eastern districts expect?
Sure, so the rest of Victoria is really quite copped it today. There's been a lot of rain, some pretty significant flooding, and the east of Victoria is not exempt from it either. We'll see that rain continue tonight and start to ease as we go into tomorrow morning. But we're likely to see rain continue until about daybreak and significant flooding on a lot of rivers, which we'll see the effects of over the coming days.
Now, I know you've had a busy day and no doubt you'll have a busy night, so thank you. And Pete will be staying across the things here, and I'll be back later in the bulletin with more weather details. OK,
thank you, Lavinia and Keris Arndt. The ultimate insult for Bali bombing survivors when graphic and distressing footage of the attack was played during a vigil in Kuta. Canberra's lodged a complaint with Indonesia, labelling the video insensitive. More from Damien Ryan.
A bugle call normally reserved for another sacred day marked that precise moment when the bombs went off 20 years ago. An event no doubt people in the crowd wanted to forget, but instead they were forced to relive it in all its horror on the big screen. The video including a reenactment and then explosions and dramatic sound effects. But worse was to come, real images of those haunting scenes.
It's huge, it's scary, everything is gone.
And those responsible, the smiling bombers.
Yaitu Amrozi, Imam Samudra, dan Ali Gufron.
Some walked away, it was too much to bear.
This is the moment of the 20th anniversary. It should be about 202 people and 88 Australians, not the terrorists and not these explosions.
Australia's Consul General in Bali, Anthea Griffin, was in attendance, but by this morning, the government was distancing itself from any involvement in the service. The Department of Foreign Affairs felt it necessary to speak out. In a statement, the government said it was deeply disappointed with some of the decisions made by organisers and has registered those concerns with their Indonesian authorities.
I think that the videos and the other things that went on at that ceremony were grossly insensitive to the families of victims.
We may be close, but things are done differently. Indonesia's graphic flashback striking the wrong chord on a difficult day. In Bali, Damien Ryan, 9 News.
He's been gone for 7 years now, but Richie Benaud is again on the verge of delighting his many fans. One of the fancies in Saturday's Caulfield Cup is named Benaud, and wheeling him all the way to the winning post is Richie's widow, Daphne. Tony Jones with the story.
Grey skies over Altona Beach, but much of the focus was on this grey. His name is Benaud, in honour of the great man himself.
The fact that the name was even available was fantastic, so we just jumped at it because it's such a cool name and he's a really cool horse, so the two go hand in hand.
Just like Richie, this Benaud is becoming a cult figure, and his biggest fan might just be Richie's wife, Daphne, who came face to face with her husband's namesake at a stable meet and greet.
The lovely thing about just a very, very short video, the horse actually gives me a lovely nuzzle. I mean, it was instant love.
In springs gone by, Daphne and Richie were keen racegoers.
I still love doing the horse racing form, looking out over Wedding Cake Island, filing the papers, watching the cricket.
Such was Richie's passion for both cricket and racing. He sometimes combined the two.
And 11 Devon Valley Lady 440. Super Tab dividends.
A potential Cups champion, named in Richie's honour, is quite the feather in his baggy green cap, and this was his baggy green that Daphne took to the stables.
Oh, he'd be delighted. I don't know whether he'd put money on it in case it put the horse off, but he'd be delighted to follow it because he was a great form follower.
Given that Benaud is currently around the $6 mark, punters could be on a decent wicket.
Nice to win for us, but more importantly, it'd be great to win for Daff and and all his old acquaintances. That are still around Coogee and Randwick and that in Sydney, and they back him every start just because of their acquaintance with Richie.
When the gates open on Saturday, there could be a little help from above. Luck and bloodlines count for plenty.
Also, it's beautifully bred as well by a reliable man out of Baggy Green, which gives it an immediate sort of cricket connotation, and hopefully Richie was the reliable man part.
And if Benaud was to salute on Saturday,
some would even go as far as to say, marvellous.
Tony Jones, 9 News.
Oh, he was marvellous, wasn't he? Amazing. Great. Thank you, Tony. And more sport now.
Yeah, absolutely, Pete. The dust, well, it's beginning to settle after that hectic trade period, and the likes of former Pie Ollie Henry is already settling into life at the Cattery.
Seeing where the boys get to work and my brother's locker, it's pretty cool.
Also tonight, Josh Dunkley on what really fuelled his desire to leave the kennel. A former Hawks homecoming in the West will hear from Atiri Jager O'Meara. The Caulfield track boss, all you need to know about how the Heath will cope with this downpour. Boy, it'll do well to cope with that, Pete.
It certainly will. Thank you, Tony. Now, just ahead in Melbourne's 9 News, 3 armed thieves hit 6 small businesses in one night. The PM pulls on the cricket whites for a backyard friendly at Kirribilli. And a freight plane loses a vital piece of cargo on takeoff. A brave service station attendant has fought off 2 armed robbers who held him up at gunpoint in Glen Waverley. The violent thieves ransacked 6 businesses in 30 minutes. Crime reporter Lana Murphy.
They hid their faces but pointed their weapons. Marching into a 7-Eleven at 4 a.m, one thief cocks his gun, the other grips an axe. Off camera, they terrorise the man standing behind the counter, but he refuses to stand down. Empty-handed, they run from the Glen Waverley store into a waiting stolen car, sparking the start of a frenzied crime spree.
6 armed robberies, in the space of 30 minutes. Clearly they would have been thinking there's a chance that they're going to be caught, so it's clearly desperate and brazen.
The first 3 attempts were failures. The thieves also hit 7-Elevens in Blackburn South and North, but they left with nothing. Then they stormed 2 nearby McDonald's, threatening staff and taking off with hundreds of dollars. Their last stop was a Coles Express in Surrey Hills. This is where they stole more cash and thousands of dollars worth of cigarettes. Once again, they had a third person waiting in a silver SUV. They made their getaway and haven't been seen since. Armed crime and the dog squad were called in to hunt them down, but tonight the men are on the run.
Very dangerous and could have been a lot worse. Some of these attendants that have been involved, I dare say it's going to affect them for a long time.
Lana Murphy, 9 News.
The Federal Treasurer today ruled out any changes to planned income tax cuts in this month's budget. Jim Chalmers is in Washington for high-level finance talks where he disagreed with the President over the economy. Fiona Willan has more.
The Prime Minister stepping up to bat in a charity cricket match at Kirribilli House, while his Treasurer is fielding questions near the White House in Washington DC, for the first time ruling out tweaks to promised tax cuts in the October budget.
Will this budget flag any changes to stage 3 tax cuts?
No. The opposition wants a guarantee they won't change at all.
We don't know whether the government's honouring their election promise on tax cuts just for this budget and it'll be reversed in the next budget or the budget after.
With this budget due in 2 weeks, Jim Chalmers says he's in the US to take the temperature of the global economy.
We won't be immune from another global downturn.
Appearing to dispute Joe Biden's assessment of how America is tracking.
I don't think there will be a recession. If it is, it'll be a very slight recession.
I think there's a pretty broad expectation around the world that there's a big risk of recession here in the United States.
He's there to meet G20 finance ministers and the International Monetary Fund for high-level talks.
High-level talks are also happening closer to home, with the Defence Minister in Papua New Guinea to meet with the Pacific Nations Prime Minister.
Richard Marles is aiming to strengthen defence ties in the region.
We've been talking a lot about how at a defence level we can do more together.
Because China is trying to do the same. Fiona Willan, 9 News.
Ukraine's NATO allies have announced deliveries of more advanced air defence weapons after a spate of Russian missile strikes on civilian targets. Meanwhile, President Vladimir Putin has arrived in Kazakhstan for talks with Turkey's president, who's offering to mediate a resolution to the conflict. A cargo plane has lost a wheel as it took off from an airstrip in southern Italy. The 100-kilogram wheel appears to catch fire before bouncing on the runway, eventually ending up in a vineyard. Boeing says the 787 safely arrived at Charleston International Airport in the United States. In the news ahead, murder finding. The coroner declares a heavily pregnant woman who disappeared near Bendigo met with foul play. Free IVF for thousands of Victorians. A radio host who called the Sandy Hook massacre a hoax, now paying the billion-dollar price. And a far from enthusiastic greeting when the King met with the British PM. A failure in the Reserve Bank's payment system froze money transfers across all of the big banks. Eddie Meyer explains what it means for customers.
The RBA's fast settlement system crashed for 4.5 hours just before midnight last night, putting a hold on automatic payments such as payrolls and direct debit payments. Also frustrated customers trying to send money via banking apps or websites. BPay payments were not affected. The Reserve Bank says it wasn't a cyber attack but an internal error and that it has now been rectified. But this now leaves customers with a headache because there's no one piece of advice on what to do, and inevitably there will be delays. Some banks will be able to automatically reprocess payments, and they have, I'm told. Others won't. So if you didn't receive your pay or another payment, contact your employer or the person sending the money. If a payment you made didn't go through or you have another concern, contact your bank.
Thank you, Eddie. Services were also disrupted for some Medibank customers today. The health insurer is the latest Australian company targeted by hackers. It says it took immediate steps to contain the incident and has not found any data was compromised. A coroner has found a pregnant woman who vanished in the state's north was murdered, and the potential father of her baby was involved in her disappearance. But the inquest heard there was not enough evidence to call Peter Jenkinson a killer. Court reporter Eliza Rugg.
Peter Jenkinson was excused from giving evidence at an inquest into the disappearance of Crystal Fraser on the grounds he could incriminate himself.
Peter, do you know where Crystal Fraser is? Did you kill her?
Today, a coroner found Crystal was murdered and Mr Jenkinson was involved in what happened to her, but stopped short of saying he was responsible for her death. Crystal was 3 days away from giving birth to a boy she'd named Ryan in June 2009. The 23-year-old, who had an intellectual disability, was last seen leaving a friend's house in Pyramid Hill after discharging herself from Bendigo Hospital. She answered a call on her mobile. The coroner said Peter Jenkinson made the call from outside Leachville's post office, as well as 19 others from the same phone box in the weeks prior. She found Mr Jenkinson then transported Crystal from her Pyramid Hill home to Leachville and that the young woman died shortly after. The coroner also found the prime suspect lied when he denied having a sexual relationship with Crystal, though the inquest did hear he was one of 3 potential fathers of her baby. The coroner says it is regrettable that the inquest didn't uncover how Crystal died, as well as the location of her body and that of her baby. The case has now been referred to the Director of Public Prosecutions. Police say their $1 million reward for information is still on offer. Eliza Rugg, 9 News.
A Connecticut jury has ruled conspiracy theorist Alex Jones must pay more than $1.5 billion to families of the victims involved in the Sandy Hook massacre for claiming the 2012 school shooting was a hoax. Adding insult to injury, Jones mocked the proceedings on his radio show as the judgment was delivered. King Charles has given British Prime Minister Liz Truss a slightly dismissive greeting when they met at Buckingham Palace.
Your Majesty, lovely to see you again. Oh, it's a great pleasure.
Anyway, no.
It was their first of many weekly audiences. 5,000 Victorians will be able to access free IVF every year if Daniel Andrews is re-elected. The service, first promised by the Premier in May last year, opens next week. State political reporter Mark Santomartino.
Leaning into the cliche.
Election campaign.
Yep. Daniel Andrews planted a kiss, 6 IVF treatments in the making. Bringing baby Elliot into the world cost mum Elizabeth $140,000.
He's well worth every cent.
It's a joy more Victorians will soon be able to afford, with taxpayers to start covering the cost of a woman's first 2 IVF attempts.
Today's the day to start signing up for services that will commence next week on Tuesday.
What we're doing is improving access for all patients for whatever treatment. Not everyone needs IVF.
Money to cover 4,000 families every year was promised by the Premier last May. If re-elected, Daniel Andrews says he'll expand that to 5,000 and establish satellite hubs across regional Victoria.
There'll be telehealth in the first instance, and we will begin in earnest from early 23.
They promised 10 community hospitals across Victoria. None were delivered.
The opposition promised a lesser IVF rebate in June and today pledged to beef up funding for the watchdog, which linked 33 deaths to 000 delays.
We can prevent them rather than report about deaths after them.
Both major parties have been relatively quiet when it comes to tax so far. Matthew Guy promised no new taxes but has committed to cutting just one. Daniel Andrews wouldn't rule anything in or out.
We've got no plans to be introducing any new taxes.
43 taxes have been increased or added.
Mark Santomartino, 9 News.
When we come back, the beast busted. A marked man on the run for weeks finally caught by police. Qantas rides out months of turbulence to forecast $1 billion profit. And Todd Woodbridge tells of his shock heart attack. Returning now to our flood coverage, Maggie Rayworth's in South Melbourne. Now, what's happening there, Maggie?
Pete, I'm just at the York Street Bridge, and if you look behind me, you can see police and SES have gathered there. Now, that's because with the rain now bucketing down here in Melbourne, there's a very real chance that the water could rise under there, potentially even to a dangerous level. So what they're doing, they're monitoring it here, and if the water does rise, they're getting ready to close that bridge to motorists. Now, we know in the past that motorists have passed through floodwaters here and have got stuck. So the advice, Pete, is to anyone who usually passes through York Street, potentially find another route home.
Yes, it can be a real trouble spot. Thank you, Maggie. And the drenching rain has forced big changes to the annual Dannahurst Drive. The 80-car convoy was meant to be on the road to central Victoria, but instead, participants have gathered at a South Melbourne pub to celebrate Neil Dannahur and his Fight MND cause. They hope to get the rally on the road to the state's east tomorrow. A wanted man who made headlines for his distinctive face tattoos has finally been caught. James Sutton was on the run near the New South Wales border, accused of traffic, property and domestic-related offences. The 24-year-old was finally arrested in Leeton, near Wagga Wagga, days after he uploaded a new photo online taunting police. Qantas delivered good news this morning: profits, discounted airfares and a pay rise for workers. But it had soured this afternoon with unions threatening strike action ahead of Christmas. Charles Croucher with the details.
The red-tailed roux back in the black.
We now expect it to be a very strong profit, somewhere between 1.2 billion to 1.3 billion.
For the first time since the pandemic, Qantas projecting profits for the second half of this year.
Inflation and interest rates haven't made a dent in people's need or desire to travel. And the research shows it's a category consumers will prioritise ahead of others.
Tonight, Qantas shares are up over 8%, but there's a new threat from workers.
This market update is crystal ball gazing, it's smoke and mirrors, and it's blame shifting. And that's what we've seen across the past 18 months with Qantas.
Cabin crew now weighing up industrial action over Christmas, filing a dispute with the Fair Work Commission over pay and an increase in work hours.
A circuit breaker is needed. We need a new CEO and a new management team, and we need a board that's willing to step up and make that so.
There aren't many companies in Australia that are sharing the benefits of a recovery the way the Qantas Group is, and we're proud of that.
Negotiations will continue, with the earliest possible disruption not until November 18. The group announcing 1 million discounted domestic fares for 2023, flights beginning at $35 for Jetstar and $99 for Qantas one way. Charles Croucher, 9 News.
And investors have responded positively to the Flying Kangaroo's change in fortune. Business reporter Chris Kohler.
Qantas told shareholders it'll be profitable again by the end of the year, and they immediately started high-fiving and buying shares. But it's been an amazing run because despite all of the chaos, Qantas shares have now risen 14% so far this year, while the rest of the share market has dropped more than 10%. Those shareholders seem to be totally focused on that improving bottom line. Elsewhere, the Australian dollar remains below 63 US cents, which is stunning when you consider that it was buying 73 US cents back in March. And the share market was steady today after Wall Street had a better night. Banks had another strong day, while health insurance company NIB fell sharply.
And the average price of unleaded in Melbourne is $1.76, but it's most expensive at Sunbury. 11 motorbikes stolen from a shipping container have been recovered. 52 bikes were in a holding yard in Sydney when they were taken, but a handful were tracked to Melbourne's western suburbs. 2 men from Williamstown and Williams Landing have been charged. Tennis great Todd Woodbridge has revealed he suffered a mild heart attack last week, describing it as a wake-up call. The 51-year-old hopes his cardiac scare prompts others to get their health in check. Emily Rice spoke to him.
Tennis great Todd Woodbridge having a mild heart attack has come as a major shock to everyone.
A mild heart attack, and I'm still today going, how's that happened to me?
The fit 51-year-old commentator was exercising at home last Thursday when he felt sudden chest discomfort.
And it got heavier. I wouldn't call it pain, but it was pressure.
Wife Natasha drove him to hospital where tests revealed the former doubles champion had suffered a heart attack due in part to hereditary high cholesterol.
It is a real wake-up call for everybody to, check out your genetic history. What is hereditary within your family?
His close call follows the deaths of cricketer Shane Warne and Labor Senator Kimberley Kitching in March, both from heart attacks at age 52.
We all think we're invincible. As you get older, you start to realise that you're not.
To reduce your risk, the Heart Foundation recommends that over 45-year-olds have a Medicare-covered heart health check with a GP to assess key risk factors such as blood pressure and cholesterol, and importantly, improve your diet and exercise regime.
Todd says his medical scare also serves as a reminder that as our lives get busier, it's important to take time out where we can.
I think even for my kids, particularly our daughter, it was that's not what I want. I want you to be around. It's what the rest of the family might have to put up with if you aren't okay.
Emily Rice, 9 News.
Now returning with sport, Tony Jones.
Thanks, Pete. Hello again. The wash-up from the trade period after the break. And he might be gone from the kennel, so Dunkley says it's time to start all over again. Ollie gets his wish to join Jack at the Cattery. And the track boss says the Caulfield Cup is still a safe bet. Former Hawk Jaeger O'Meara shed tears after being traded to Fremantle, revealing coach Sam Mitchell encouraged him to leave. Hawthorn sent both O'Meara and Tom Mitchell packing, and as Joshua Dorr tells us, it's raised serious concerns about the club's leadership.
Home is where the heart is, but even for Jaeger O'Meara, this switch was a surprise.
Monday morning, didn't expect to be wearing these colours.
The West Australian's departure was sparked over the weekend at the wedding of close mate Stephen Canelio, where the Giants made their pitch before Fremantle got word and swooped on the 28-year-old.
It's not often that you only have 48 hours to decide what you're doing with your life for the next 4 years.
The deal completed 5 minutes before deadline, Hawthorn receiving a future second-round pick and ruckman Lloyd Meek. They'll also be paying part of O'Meara's salary, Sam Mitchell giving him the blessing to pursue finals footy.
Him not begging me to stay probably painted a little picture of where I was at and where I fit into that team. I cried a little bit because you're leaving so many good people behind. And it came really abruptly for me.
He's not the only Hawk to find a third club. Tom Mitchell landing at Collingwood on a 3-year deal. James Warple now the only player left from last year's leadership group.
It's hard to see how they win more than 6 games next year, and the damage of the repeated beatings will have on this young group might be scarring.
Mitchell's move, the catalyst for the Pies to release Ollie Henry to Geelong, securing pick 25 from the Cats in a 3-club deal, sparing the threat of Henry leaving for nothing.
This morning woke up and realised it's all come true, and walking in was even better, seeing where the boys get to work and my brother's locker. It's pretty cool.
The Cats keeping Asava Radaglia and securing all 3 trade targets.
Stephen Wells licking his lips with pick 7. You guys tell us enough that we are ageing, so every now and then we do listen.
Joshua Dorr, 9 News.
New Lion Josh Dunkley isn't expecting an easy ride in Brisbane following his exit from the kennel. The star midfielder declaring he needs to earn his stripes all over again. Here's Braden Ingram.
As the Lions crunched the numbers in the final minutes, Josh Dunkley was on the family farm, hoping he wouldn't be left stranded again.
The old man actually was saying to me he's never been so nervous in his life 15 minutes ago, I think it was.
Unlike 2 years ago, his wish to depart the Dogs came to fruition, now to start fresh up north.
I've got to earn my stripes all over again. I want to be, even better again with my footy, and I know that I can take things to new levels.
Fresh off winning the Bulldogs Best and Fairest, the 25-year-old will look to bring extra firepower to the Lions star midfield.
I think this year's been a big learning curve for me that I can, go forward and take marks and kick goals. So probably to build that side of my game again and really impact the scoreboard.
While Dunkley heads into state, Sam Wiedemann is only headed across town, hopeful he can fulfil his potential at the Bombers.
Career at the D's is pretty up and down. I think I played some good footy, but probably just didn't quite click there. And I think coming to Essendon, I think there's a really big opportunity for me.
And he's ready to embrace a possible positional change.
I think my best footy will be up forward and pinch hitting in the ruck. I'm really open to playing down back as well. I think that'll be a great opportunity if that comes around.
And tonight, the end of the road for a handful of Tigers at Punt Road, delisting 4 players, chief among them Sydney Stack, who electrified in some of his 35 games. He'll certainly be remembered for being involved in that Gold Coast brawl up in the hub back in 2020. Also delisted alongside him, small forward Jake Arts and Riley Collier-Dawkins. Certainly, Collier-Dawkins and Stack could be a chance to be picked up elsewhere. Tony?
Right, Braden Ingram reporting live there. Racing and the Melbourne Racing Club is insisting that the Caulfield Cup is in no danger whatsoever of being called off, despite the deluge that's hitting Melbourne. Course officials are forecasting a heavy track for Saturday, but the show will go on.
It's actually recovered quite well. I'm very happy with the way. There's not too much wear out there. Whilst I think we'll be punching around on a pretty wet track, it'll be all good to go.
Meanwhile, ahead of that $15 million Everest in Sydney, star hoop Huey Bowman took on bar duties today, but it'll be the champagne flowing if he scores an upset on Lost and Running.
I've just got to worry about my horse and not make the mistake of trying to beat Nature Strip, because if that's my mindset, we're already lost.
Speaking of which, Chris Waller's Nature Strip is the short price favourite to claim back-to-back Everests. And Melbourne United coach Dean Vickerman is urging his young side to find its voice ahead of tomorrow's tough trip west to take on Perth. It follows United's 20-point reality check at the hands of Sydney.
We've got kind of a quiet group right now, so we're really demanding that we get more from everybody and their ability to help each other with the communication.
It doesn't get any easier on Sunday with a clash against the Tassie Jack Jumpers at John Cain Arena. And that's sport for tonight, Pete. Stay dry.
I think good idea. Thank you, Tony. Thanks. Well, it's time to check back to Lavinia, and Melbourne's escaped the worst of the weather, Lavinia.
Oh, it has peaked despite today's very threatening grey skies. The heavy rain held off until about an hour ago, and it'll continue easing tonight before clearing around 10 or 11 p.m. Unfortunately, the threat of flooding will persist. I'll have those details after the break.
Melbourne's weather emergency.
Several communities are fighting to keep their heads
Wild
above
winds
water
and flooding rains. Urgent warnings right across the state. 9 News has reporters live on the scene. And Lavinia with the latest from the Bureau. Special coverage on 9 News.
Hello again, and while Melbourne was in a rain shadow for most of the day, it was very mild overnight. The city only dropped to 15, then only managed to climb 2 degrees to reach 17. The heavy rain finally arrived about an hour ago. So far there's been 7 millimetres in addition to the 22 overnight. Around the suburbs there was 25 to 35 millimetres in the east, 10 to 20 through western suburbs. Since 9 a.m, 16 millimetres has been recorded at Point Cook, 12 at Werribee. Further south, Rosebud has had 18 millimetres and there's been 22 at Geelong. Further out, other parts of the state have copped the brunt of a very slow-moving cold front. Since the system arrived, 186 millimetres has fallen at Strathbogie. There's been 122 at Seymour. Elevated areas have been smashed by damaging winds, up to 132 kilometres an hour in the alpine regions, and a severe weather warning remains in place for damaging winds. The warning area is also for heavy rainfall that could lead to flash flooding. The heaviest falls will contract to the northeast district tonight. We could still see totals of around 100 millimetres in that part of the state. For tomorrow, the system will move away pretty quickly, so rain clearing from eastern districts in the morning. There will be some scattered showers redeveloping across the south as a weak trough moves through. They'll only be light though, and most places are forecast to get less than 6 millimetres. Possible storms in the southeast, and the Mallee is looking mostly dry. It'll be a cooler night with minimums mostly in single figures. Cooler westerly winds are arriving behind that front. They'll cap maximums to the mid-teens for most places in the south. Staying milder in Gippsland though, Bairnsdale should be our warmest spot tomorrow, heading for 20. In the north, maximums of 17, 18 and 19 along the Murray. A number of flood warnings are in place across the state, with major flooding for Campaspe, Goulburn, Loddon, Maribyrnong and King Rivers, as well as the Severn and Castle Creeks. River rises are expected for the coming days, so even once the heavy rain has passed, do make sure to stay safe on the roads and never drive through floodwaters. For Melbourne, the heaviest rain has now cleared the city. It's currently over eastern suburbs. Light showers will persist tonight, but eventually clear by 10 or 11 p.m. Tomorrow, remaining showers will be heaviest east of the city, up to 6 millimetres. Less for western suburbs, 2 or 3, and most spots are heading for 17 or 18 degrees. A top of 17 in Geelong with a shower or two. Top of 18 degrees in the city, up to 3 millimetres and a possible storm. And it will be a bit windy in the afternoon with gusts of 25 to 35 kilometres an hour. Then settling down for the weekend. A top of 18 on Saturday, 19 and mostly sunny on Sunday, dry and 18 Monday, up to 22 on Tuesday, 24 and sunny on Wednesday and 22 degrees next Thursday. So although today has been awful for our state, there is definitely some nice days to look forward to there, Pete.
That's good to hear. Thank you, Lavinia. And Melbourne, that's what's news this Thursday. Chris O'Keefe next with the current affair. Enjoy your evening and good night. Now.